So I'm trying something a little bit different here. I got this wonderful question in my email from a young autistic person who is grappling with wanting to do self advocacy, feeling really called to do advocacy for the autistic community and against applied behavioral analysis therapy in particular. But they're not quite sure how to strike that balance between sharing their story, expressing the harm that is done by therapies like this, and really trying to make that emotional appeal that often works so well to autism parents, educators, institutions to try and get this stuff changed, and also really trying to protect their own energy and not get re traumatized doing this stuff because a lot of the time, no matter how much you bare your soul and no matter how much that can be effective, it isn't something that you necessarily see the effects of in an immediate way yourself that can be very rewarding. And you open yourself up to a lot of scrutiny and re traumatization and things like that. So I was going to write an email to this person, but I thought, this is really similar to a lot of questions that I get quite often. And it's something that I struggle with in my own life and have learned a lot of lessons related to. And I kind of felt like kind of experimenting in how I approached it. So I'm using my rudimentary OBS skills here. Here's the overlay that I use for streaming typically. This is my Fursona. Oh, wait, wrong way. My Fursona DD. But I'm going to just switch over to an overlay with the email pulled up and just kind of talk through my reactions to it. And I hope to the person who emailed me that this gives you just some perspective that you can take in, take what's valuable from it for yourself, and decide your own viewpoint on the matter. And others who I know are also really considering this stuff quite frequently. I hope you'll sit with it as well and feel free to share your own perspectives in the comments and things like that. So again, highly rudimentary OBS skills. So you're gonna see me in the guts of OBS for a second here, changing the screen share. But I'm not a perfectionist, and in the spirit of anti-masking, I do things a little bit off the cuff sometimes. So here's the email. As a young autistic person navigating life in Utah, where ABA therapy dominates public perceptions of autism, I've been reflecting on how to approach advocacy in a way that challenges harmful systems while staying true to myself. I feel strongly about helping people understand the complexities of autism and mental health without compromising the authenticity you so powerfully emphasize in your work. Thank you. I would love the chance to have a conversation with you, whether by Zoom, phone, or another way, to get your perspective on three key questions that have been weighing on me. This is the way that I'm reaching out because sometimes live meetings, especially in the lead up to a book release, I'm sorry, are just really draining for me, and I get these questions a lot, and I find them really important to respond to, and they move me, and I want to really treat them with the care that they deserve. And then also the number of people that I hear from, sometimes I can't allot the energy that I want to everyone. So hopefully shows care. The first question: how can young neurodivergent individuals balance personal storytelling with protecting their mental health? I believe that this requires a really careful study of your own reactions and long term responses to getting vulnerable. Because in the moment, when you are in the room at a workshop or at a listening session, a meeting with stakeholders, whatever it may be, and you are speaking from the heart about some of the trauma you've endured, it can feel really good. It's good to be able to express these things when you've never had the platform for it in the past. People will be giving you a lot of attentiveness and kind of feeding off of your emotional energy, and they kind of really are feeding off of it in ways both good and bad. And it feels like really important stuff. It is really important stuff. People are more persuaded by emotional appeals than by statistics or scientific research. So it is very valuable for you to be telling your story. And it is often for us healing in certain ways to say, I endured these things, they were wrong, and here I am speaking truth to power and trying to really have that validated. We also exist in a culture where there's lots and lots of media depictions where all it takes is the heartfelt speech to change the world. You just need to stand in your truth, and if you make a compelling enough, earnest enough, emotional appeal, then it will change people's hearts and minds, and everybody's going to clap, and the world will be moved. And that part is a lie. That is a very individualistic lie. It makes for really great storytelling. It makes for a really compelling like movie or TV episode. And it is propaganda on some level to convince us that we, as individuals who are marginalized and are traumatized, we are the ones who are on the hook for changing everything, and all we need to do is just lay our individual bodies on the line, rip open our hearts, and let everybody dig around in our guts and make them aware and move them emotionally. And if we put on a good enough performance, that's going to change everything. Sometimes it's true that making that emotional appeal really does hit people and make people realize that what they're doing is wrong. But the way that that actually works, most of the time, and this is speaking as a psychologist who my primary research area was persuasion, political persuasion, for a very long time. Sometimes you can plant a seed. You can leave people with an emotional message that does carry over with them over time. And as they think on it and they collect more information and they get more social pressure to change their ways, and all of these different influences accumulate and time passes, they change their own mind. In social psychology, we call that elaboration. They are mentally elaborating on what you have given them, building their own meaning and interpretation. And one day, maybe 10 years after you talked to them and told your story, they're going to walk away and say, wow, ABA is wrong. I should have never practiced it, or I should have never had it instituted at my school or whatever. And I'm a changed person. And that's really how persuasion and human change works. It takes a ton of time, and it takes people having both an emotional and a social incentive. They kind of need a social reason, some social pressure to do it, to make a big change, and they also have to have some emotional investment. And you telling your story and kind of trying to shift the culture, it can help contribute to that. But a lot of that stuff is needed. It takes a lot of that kind of pressure and a lot of time and reflection for a person to change their own mind. You really, as an individual, almost never have the power to change someone else's mind for them. So I would say it's really important to take that burden off of yourself, that mythology that we are really heavily ingrained with, that like West Wing kind of view of the world. If you ever saw that TV show where like all it takes is one person giving a really persuasive speech to like change the world, that is not how things work. You can help provide some of that emotional incentive that in the long term will make some people change, in addition to all these other influences that they get. But you are not going to be that one make or break person. It's not all riding on you. If you decide to turn down an invitation to speak, that is not going to make or break whether somebody changes their mind on ABA therapy or on whether autism is a pathology. Don't put that much pressure on yourself. You will get that pressure put on you sometimes, being told that telling your story is the be all and end all, and that you owe your story to other people, to the movement, or to the neurotypical audience, and you do not owe them that. You have already served your time and endured your trauma. You should really only do this kind of work because, as you say, you feel really called to do it, and because you feel emotionally prepared to do it. So that's why I say, if you do feel moved to do this work, and it sounds like you do it, try it, but really study the toll that it takes on you. And not just how you feel that day, because you will often be showered in praise and people thanking you, maybe people infantilizing you or being kind of weird and othering to you. speaking from personal experience, but also just a lot of gratitude and emotional movement coming from people. People will be moved from hearing your story, and that can all feel great. But look at how you feel, 10 days afterward. Journal on it. Talk to friends. Keep a diary or a calendar. Are you stressed? Are you really anxious and bundled up? Do you feel re-traumatized? Do you feel used? Have you lost some skills temporarily, taken a backslide in your healing? These are all important things to look out for that can signal that you've been drained a little too much. And this is stuff that I really know personally, having both done a lot of talks like this and even in the course of writing Unmasking Autism. I'm glad I've done it, but those few months that I was writing Unmasking Autism, I was really jittery, I was anxious and easily pissed off. I had to play a lot of first person shooters every night after writing just to like get my rage out and distract myself. And it dug up a lot of wounds and things that I was going through when I first was figuring out that I was autistic. All of that stuff came back as I was revisiting it and writing about it. So take notice of that stuff. The other thing that I would say you should take notice of as you share your story and make these impassioned appeals is look at what kind of sense of reward and gratification you really get from it. Did an institution change? Did a person really thank you and seem like they really got it? If you're talking to an individual family, what changes did you see in that family and how they treat their autistic kid? You want to go after the moments to be heard where it's really going to make a difference that you can see. And as I just said, it's really hard to find those. Change happens really slowly, and a lot of institutions don't actually change. And that is the kind of stuff that leads to burnout. When you are working and working, exposing your most vulnerable parts, revisiting really intense trauma, and they thank you and they say it was so moving and so special and you're such a fascinating person and all this stuff, and then they do nothing. That is a one-way road to burnout like none other. And that's why I've given up on giving certain kinds of talks at certain places, big institutions that don't actually give a shit about their neurodivergent employees, for example. They'll thank me and they'll pay me and they'll, say it was so special to hear from me. And then they'll turn around the next day and they'll fire a neurodivergent employee for like being weird and like being not a culture fit. That is really unrewarding work for me. So I don't do that work anymore. And with time, I think you'll probably find whatever the equivalent of that is for you, where there are places where you'll be invited to tell your story, but it's ultimately kind of like pornographic. It's like tragedy porn. People are using you for a chance to like look at and listen to a fascinating autistic person, but they're not actually going to take you seriously and listen to you or do anything different. So those are my tips. Understand how persuasion works. Don't expect yourself to be the change and to see that change all of the time. And with that in mind, know that you don't owe your story to people who aren't going to really value it. And yeah, it can be both rewarding and very emotionally costly. None of this is a discouragement to do it, by the way. It's just that these are some of the factors to really think about. The second question is, what are compassionate yet impactful ways to address outdated practices like ABA therapy in public conversations? Compassion is a great place to start. I think there's been in the autistic self-advocacy community a lot of snark, a lot of hating on the autism warrior mommy. It all comes from a very emotionally legitimate place, and if people are just trying to express their rage and trauma and grief, that's fine. But if you're trying to persuade, that's a different matter, right? If you're trying to just vent and just be heard in your pain, that's one thing. That's great. I'm never going to take away your right to do that. But if you are trying to actually reach people and persuade them, compassion and curiosity really are key. There's a writer I love who I've cited many times, Jesse Meadows, And Jesse Meadows has a piece on Medium called The Autism Warrior Mommy. Why is she like that? And it really unpacks why so many parents of autistic kids have such damaging worldviews of autism and some of the structural issues, the lack of supports for disabled people in their families that, excuse me, that even if they don't excuse the behavior, they do contextualize and explain it, and I think are worth considering. So I suggest reading that. It's a really compassionate perspective. But in the one on one conversation with the ABA therapist, the parent who has their kid going through ABA, I think you do want to reach people where they're at and have some degree of curiosity about their perspective and why they're doing what they're doing. Um, Parents, I think, are easier to reach on this front than therapists. ABA therapists have an incredible amount of authority and control over their students, their patients, and they're going to be really defensive over the power that they do have. I don't think they're generally easy to reach for the most part. They tend to be in my inbox yelling at me and insulting me and saying, how dare I challenge ABA? So I don't think it's worth going after them. But I think it is worth going after individual teachers who are trying to do right but don't know what they're doing, individual parents who have been propagandized and fearmongered and don't know what they're doing. And you really have to start from a place of good faith, which can be really hard. And if you are not equipped to do this work, you do not have to do this work. I'm going to just emphasize that right out the gate. If you can't be patient and compassionate, ask people curious questions and believe their answers, if you're going to be angry, snarky, cut them off, think that you know better than them, even if you do know better than them, it doesn't matter. If you're going to bring that energy to the conversation, it's not going to go anywhere. People are going to feel defensive and condescended to. People just don't respond well to that. And so if that's just the energy you're bringing to the conversation, that is not your journey. Like, there's plenty of other work you can do. Like, you can write the polemic that's like, here's why ABA is torture, bum, 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 point by point, and just really drag them through the mud. You can make those videos. You can do those protests. You have a place in the struggle. But if you can't be patient and curious with the parents on an individual one-on-one, I'm seeing you eye to eye kind of level, just don't go into that work. That is fine. You don't have to do that work. I am often not a patient person. I'm often not doing that work. You don't have to do that work. But if you want to do that work, there's really a place for it, and it really is important. And so what you do is you really ask the person about their life. Tell me about your kid. Tell me about what are some of the things that your kid has a hard time with. What gets them frustrated? What do they find confusing? What's their day-to-day life like? What led you to ABA? Who told you it was a good idea? What are you getting out of it right now? And that can be hard to ask because a lot of us rightly want to go into it saying ABA is torture. It trains kids to be compliant. It abuses them. It makes them easy victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, all this stuff. We don't want to say that anything good is coming out of ABA. But we do have to hear those parents who, for example, are black parents to black kids who are really terrified that if their kid is making noise in public or running around in public, they're going to get shot or get arrested. There are parents who reach out for ABA because they need their kid, in their mind, they need their kid to be more behaviorally compliant because for their kid, the choice is compliance or death. That is a reality. It's not fair. It doesn't make ABA a good solution. Conditioning a kid to comply is awful and also feeds into systemic racism. It's not the right answer. But sometimes, for some parents, it feels like the only answer, and they're in an emergency situation. And so I think the stereotype is that autistic people, we have really black and white logic. Something's either right or it's wrong. I don't think that's always necessarily true. But I do think for this conversation, if we do have that thing going on, we need to put that aside and really look at what is this person's situation? Why are they making this decision to use ABA? Have they even been given a choice? Because a lot of times they haven't been. And can I really hear them about why they're in this situation? And if you really sit down and listen to these parents and really sit with them and be present rather than getting super activated and judging them, time and time again, you'll hear, I put my kid in this therapy because they are being forced to by their school. Their school told me that if they're going to go to school, they have to go into ABA. My kid is in danger of running into the street and getting hit by a car or in danger of getting arrested. And I don't know how to get my kid to listen to me. I don't know how to protect my kid's body safety. And so I've had to take away their autonomy and put them into ABA. Things like this will repeatedly come up. And then you'll also have parents who they don't know about neurodiversity. They haven't been given the framework to see their kid's disability as social and contextual and in need of accommodation. And they've been told, your kid has this horrible disorder. You need to cure it and you need to make them normal. And they're ignorant. And they might say things that are really hurtful. They might be doing things that are really hurtful, but that is literally all they know. And they are not doing it out of some evil in their heart. They're doing it because they're a product of this society. So listen to them. Really try your best to believe them. Suss out whether they really do have their kids' best intentions at heart. And you'll be able to tell, I think, who are the people you can reach and who really do care for and respect and love their kid and just feel stuck or don't know any better. And tell the difference between them and the people who love exerting power over their kids and don't respect their kids and just want their kids to be a trained pet. Again, those people you can't reach. If somebody wants to be abusing children, you can't just convince them to not want to abuse children. But if you have someone who feels stuck or is ignorant, you can make some progress there. And for those people you can reach, just share with them a little bit of your own perspective and help them understand their kids' behavior better. A lot of parents, it can be a real world opening thing, a real mind breaking thing to learn that, hey, your kid is not having these meltdowns to spite you. They're in constant pain. They're being forced to do things that hurt them. They're not letting you brush their teeth because to them it hurts and they don't understand why you're hurting them. And maybe it's worth a trade-off of maybe they're going to have not the best oral hygiene in the world, but maybe they're going to be hitting you and hitting themselves a little bit less. And can we strike a balance here? You know, can you give them an apple that's going to clean their teeth some of the time instead of brushing their teeth and holding them down? You know, talk about how things feel for you. Help them decode their kids' behavior a little bit. Introduce them to lots of other autistic people if you can. Other autistic kids, other autistic people. Introduce them to other autistic parents, parents who are themselves autistic, so that these parents can see, oh, there is a future for my kid. There's a lot of different ways that an autistic person can grow up. And these needs that they have, that they're communicating, are not to spite me. They're not being bad. And however my kid turns out, it's going to be okay. A lot of autism parents are really hooked on this idea that they need to make their kids get a degree and get a job. And if you can introduce to them the idea that maybe your kid's never going to finish school, maybe your kid shouldn't be in school or that kind of school, maybe your kid's never going to work a full-time job, maybe your kid's never going to be hammered into that square peg shape and forced into that peg and become a normal, quote-unquote, cog in society. And maybe it would be better if you just let them be who they are and figure out what a comfortable life looks like for them that really honors their difference. That's really scary stuff. Most parents want their kid to be able to be okay in life and to have a future that's independent. And so there's a lot of unpacking you have to do for people in introducing that nobody's really independent. An independent, quote-unquote, life is not attainable to almost any of us. And your kid's still a pretty awesome, lovable, great person who can be okay and have an okay life, even if they are on government benefits, if they have support and care workers, if they need to live with a relative, a sibling, a friend, a guardian all their life, they can be okay. And so you don't need to pressure them and force them to be something that, in all honesty, they're probably never going to be. Um, can you work with your kid as they are rather than trying to force them to be something else because you think that that's going to protect them? This is a long process of reframing that you have to walk people through. So, a lot of times it is a really slow one on one process that you kind of have to walk people through. And you have to meet them wherever they're at. And that can be something as simple as, have you considered your kids having a meltdown because they are being forced? They're being literally forced to do things that hurt them and that confuse them. Can you slow down? Can you get rid of some of those expectations? Can you just demand a little bit less of them? What are some of the demands you can take away to calm them down and make your life easier too? That's often a really good place to start. And I think it's worth honoring if a parent is trying, that it is really hard to go against the grain in society as a disabled person or the loved one of a disabled person in an ableist world. So you have to kind of give them their kudos. It's a lot of case management and advocacy work, a lot of documentation, a lot of meeting with therapists and doctors. And in every single one of those meetings, you have to stand up and say, no, my kid's actually fine, or my kid doesn't want to do that, or, I have no expectation that my kid's ever going to be able to drive a car, or whatever it is, or go grocery shopping if they can't go grocery shopping. You have to constantly push back against those pressures to hammer your kid into a square peg shape if you are a parent, a teacher, an advocate of an autistic kid. And so if you can really just hold some respect for how much work that is for people and that they're not going to always do it perfectly, that is how we win over more allies and advocates. It is hard work. It requires patience and a lot of grace, putting yourself in their shoes and letting a few ignorant comments sometimes slide and really working with them really, really slowly and patiently. Just like I said in my response to question 1, change happens over time, it happens emotionally, and it happens socially. You can't just give someone the guidebook that says, here's what you need to do for your kid instead of ABA, and here's all the research as to why you should do it, and expect them to believe that. It unfortunately does not work that way. Instead, it's lots and lots of conversations, hearing where they're at, hearing their fears for the future, hearing their confusion and discomfort, even hearing their grief, and taking that in as much as you can without it damaging your own mental health. Take breaks. Only do this with the people you can stand it. And then in addition to that emotional piece, having a lot of social support put towards that person, having them meet other autistic people, having them see the neurodiversity movement and the neurodiverse world, and really helping them understand that there is a place out there for their autistic kid as they are. So again, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of long-term work in those 3 angles: time, emotions, and social connections. And you should really only do it when you are getting something out of it and you can see the progress and it feels good for you to be doing. And if you find yourself feeling resentful or angry, or you can't really be present for those conversations, that's fine. Again, that does not need to be your struggle. Maybe it's time to take a step back. And that brings us to the final question, one I think I've kind of been answering throughout. How can younger advocates build meaningful change while staying true to themselves and their communities? I think you really do have to go at this stuff at your own pace. As I already said, don't put that pressure on yourself to do it all and to do it all the time. I think if you can have these conversations with a really strong support network in place and with a variety of other autism self-advocates, so much the better. It might take you and like 2 or 3 other autistic people who really care about this stuff to change the mind of even one family, to really be a support network there for even one autistic family and their autistic kid. It will take dozens of you fighting really hard to change a school. You telling your own story, no matter how vulnerably and persuasively and authentically, is not going to be enough to make a school care about disabled people and make a change that is for them going to be really expensive and uncomfortable. Institutions move very slowly. They are highly resistant to change. They will punish whistleblowers. They will punish the people who speak out. They'll use you up and squeeze you out, wring you out, get all of the emotional vulnerability out of you, and just bathe themselves in it and love it and then do nothing. An individual alone can't really make a change. We need collective power and collective support most of the time to make a difference. So that's things like a bunch of disabled people and their allies getting together and doing a school walkout, or a bunch of teachers going on a strike. It means organizing in the streets. It means slowing down the operations of a company. It means unionizing a workplace. It means rebelling against a state government. It means fighting for things like prison abolition. It means fighting for things like psychiatric abolition, ending forced institutionalization, ending the laws and policies that force kids into ABA. One person alone doesn't have the institutional power to do this stuff. And I know that sounds bleak, but I also say that to give you permission to not fight battles that are just going to drain you and that you're not going to win. You can't do all of this stuff. And you certainly can't do it alone. But what you can do is you can meet with other disabled people. You can combine your forces and power. You can educate others in a way that's sustainable for you. And you're not just educating people so that you are, sacrificing yourself to enlighten them. You want to build comrades. You want to build allies who are going to not just change their perspective, but are going to change their actions and really show up for you. So as a younger advocate, that can mean things like starting a disability justice coalition at your school. At the school where I teach, there is a Students with Disabilities Coalition, and they are advocating for things like making every building Americans with Disabilities Act accessible, right? Changing menus in the dining halls so that there are options for people who are gluten sensitive or have food allergies, things that are often really highly comorbid with autism. They are fighting for fair attendance policies that allow kids to attend class from home and things like that. Or to get the accommodations they need if they have ADHD or autism or whatever else. They're doing that stuff collectively, and they're having to join forces with other student groups or with student workers who are unionizing on campus to get fair pay and fair work policies at school. Like, these are the ways that we often make change happen. And from your perspective, as the person emailing me or the person watching this video, that can be as simple as having conversations, bringing together a meeting, asking other people about what's hardest for them, listening to them, and just keeping that momentum going. You want to read about labor organizing. You want to read about anarchist affinity groups. You want to learn about mutual aid. You want to learn about how change happens. And that's a lifelong project. Like, I am still constantly researching movements of the past, whether it's the Black Panthers or the Paris Commune, to see, here are how people tried to get change to happen in the past, and here's where that failed, here's where it got suppressed, here's where it succeeded. All the different working pieces that go in there. But the most important thing I think that I really want to convey is that you shouldn't put all of the pressure to do this onto yourself. This is not an individual project. This is a collective struggle. And what that means is you don't have to do that emotionally gutting, draining work if that stuff makes you sick, re-traumatizes you, makes you pissed off, makes you more pessimistic, all of this stuff that really indicates that it's taking a toll. There are a lot of signs you can look out for that indicate that maybe you're not quite in the right position in the struggle, or that you're burning yourself out. So what are some of the things to look out for? Resentment. If you are just hating people, and even hating the people that you work with, you're doing too much, or you're doing the wrong kind of work. If you feel like nobody else is working as hard as you are in this fight, and everybody else in your organization or whatever is slacking off, you're doing too much. If you think other people aren't doing enough, that means you're doing too much, or you're doing the wrong kinds of work. If you feel like a used up tissue that people are just like dumping their emotions into, you are doing too much emotional work right now, and not refilling your own emotional energy stores enough. If you are angry, if you have a lot of physical tension in your body, if you're having lots of nightmares, if you can't sleep, if your stomach is constantly in knots, if you have nothing you're looking forward to in life, if you're not enjoying the work, if you don't spend the end of your days looking back, as you're getting into bed, looking back on what you did that day and saying, that was worth it, then you're not doing the right work for you, or you need a break. Those are huge signs of burnout, and you want to stop at those early signs. You don't want to have to stop because your body is breaking down and you're, puking up blood in a bathroom and you're sick. I've been there. I wrote a whole book about burnout. I know what that stuff is like. I've seen it. And the pressure to still bring myself to that point again is almost constant. Um, Again, because we live in this really individualistic culture that says you need to be the change. You need to give the big speech. You need to meet with all of the people. You need to fight tirelessly if you believe in something. And if you don't give your all, then you're not giving anything at all. And it doesn't matter. That is so not true. It's not about you as one person. It's about us. It's about what we're doing as a movement that is smart and strategic, that is building power, and that is forcing institutions to change, and that is giving individual people a reason to care about us and really putting it into their face that we are not going anywhere, that this is a movement, the world is changing, the world's perspective on autism is changing, and they're going to have to get with the program or they're going to be left behind. That's the more like aggressive version of the story. That's the story that we tell when we're all kind of lined up and flanked up and we've got our like power behind us. But when you're meeting with somebody one-on-one and you're trying to just explain your perspective, all you really have to say is, hey, this is my take on it. This is what I've been through as an autistic person, and this is why I fight. And this is why me and all of the other disabled people around me fight. And we'd love to have you with us. That's the ask. Fighting ableism means fighting racism. It means fighting sexism, transphobia, capitalism, imperialism, genocide, all of these things. And you can't do everything in these battles. But if you are doing the right kind of work, it is moving against these institutions while showing a great deal of compassion and love for the very people who are ground down by those institutions. Because the teacher who is really impatient with their autistic student is a teacher who is overworked, who hasn't been given enough training and support, who works really long hours for really little pay. They're being exploited too. And if we can get them to realize that we're all on the same side, then we have a lot of power together. And the autism parent who thinks that they need to train their kid to sit politely and not speak and not stim, that is a parent who is isolated, who doesn't have enough money and time to show up for their kid, who's working for a full-time job while trying to parent and doesn't have a community supporting them, who doesn't know other disabled people, whose kid hasn't gotten to meet other disabled people, who thinks that the only way forward is for their kid to be an ideal worker. And that person is oppressed too. And so we have to show a little love and compassion towards that so that we can help wake them up to that fact. Because we are all on the same side here. And we will only win when we are all fighting together on the same side. That's the big picture vision of the change. And I can hear my cat meowing on the outside of the door, so I'm going to wrap things up. But that's the big picture vision of the change. The short-term personal message that I have for you is do the work that really is rewarding to you, that helps you feel less alone, that helps you feel good, that helps you feel powerful and like other people are there for you, and that makes you see the good in other people and the potential in all of us. And if that's telling your story and meeting other people and listening to their stories, that's a beautiful thing. And if it's something else, that's great too. You know, it can be updating the spreadsheets, it can be keeping the meeting minutes, it can be caring for your loved ones, it can be caring for yourself, it can be just surviving, you know, it can be writing the anti ABA therapy rants and books. There's a lot of places where you can belong, and this is not all on you. So I hope that is helpful. Thank you for listening. Thank you for emailing me. Thank you to everybody who emails me questions like this. And yeah, I think I'm gonna put this on YouTube and Substack so other people. I know so many people who read and listen to me and email me. You're fighting these same fights. A lot of times you're doing stuff that it feels way more impactful and out on the ground than the stuff I'm doing, sitting here writing my little essays from the comfort of my home with my little kitty. Uh, but so thank you, and I'd love to hear about what's worked for you and how you do this stuff in a way that's emotionally manageable for you, because it's tiring stuff, um, and I think most of us do it because we feel like it's the most important thing we can do, and we need to do it. But that also means sometimes that we need to step away and find something else too, and that's completely fine. And if this isn't your calling, that's okay. Staying alive as a disabled person, or making the life that you do have for however long it is meaningful and worthwhile, that itself is a beautiful thing. So um, so thank you for listening, um, and yeah, you asked in your email for a recording, so here it is. Um, Thank you so much.